Super 12 in 2022. That's apparently what we could be looking at if the latest reports out are true. It's still a bit of speculation, but there's been a fair bit of talk about the Moana Pasifika side along with a Fijian side to join in a combined Aussie-New Zealand Pacific Super Rugby competition starting next year. There had been talk of a Hawaiian team joining in as well. And they kind of put it out there that New Zealand rugby are pretty difficult to deal with. But it seems the focus is away from them and more about getting a 12-team competition set up, which is kind of in this neck of the woods. Obviously, no South Africa. Those teams have committed to joining into the Pro competition over in Europe. Currently, the Pro 14. Which will become a Pro 16 when the Kings and the Cheetahs drop out, but the Sharks, Bulls, Lions and Stormers are added in. I know there's still some pretty burnt emotions from people in terms of the breakup of Super Rugby, but this is just currently where we're at. So a Pacific competition, still retaining the name Super Rugby apparently, seems to be the one on the cards. Now, we saw the Moana Pasifika team have a one-off match against the Māori All Blacks last year. Tana Umanga was involved with that. And it was largely made up of players from New Zealand Super Rugby teams who are of Pacific heritage. But I'm hoping going forward what it means is more chances for guys from the Pacific Islands, other than New Zealand, to actually get a chance to earn a professional contract. There seems to be a bit of optimism that that will be the case, with COVID actually maybe being a draw card for guys to return to the Pacific and New Zealand, where the situation, at least currently, although our vaccine rollout is behind a lot of countries, but our community cases are virtually zero, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific. So, yeah, that seems to be a bit of a draw. And there's also mentioned, I'll put the article's link in the description so you guys can have a wee look, but mentioned that the clubs up north are, due to the financial constraints of COVID, having to reduce their salary caps or reduce their spending as well. So there may be less or fewer lucrative contracts up north for guys from this part of the world, being the Pacific. So, yeah, and then the the Fijian team, I think on the back of the success of the Drua, if you didn't know, the Drua play in the NRC, which is the Australian equivalent of the Curry Cup or the Mitre 10 Cup. They won the competition not that long ago, so their team, made up of largely, I think, pretty much all Fijian-based local players, has been a phenomenal success. I know Fiji has a lot bigger population than like the likes of Samoa and Tonga. So yeah, it seems like both of these teams potentially have a future in Super Rugby. Obviously, there's no details yet, but the main sticking point, which is like a one that's been kind of removed from the equation, is New Zealand Rugby's agreement to do a bit of the old revenue sharing from the broadcast. So that would make the teams a lot more financially viable, because that broadcast money is just the lifeblood. Like if you're relying on ticket sales, that's not the majority of where the money comes from. If you ever wondered why like Super Rugby was always trying to expand, it was to get more games on the TV, because when they signed those broadcast deal, they're able to offer more games if there's more teams, but that was kind of to the detriment of the competition. But it seems to be that there's a realization that maybe like the Aotearoa and AU comps are kind of okay for now. You can already see there's that Trans-Tasman competition on the cards for 2021, but going forward it does need to be bigger. The AU comp and the Aotearoa comp, with only 5 teams in them, like, yeah, short term I think are okay. But at least the Aussie numbers I haven't seen, but the New Zealand numbers that I have seen from the first 2 rounds haven't been kind of earth-shattering in terms of the attendances. So it may be that the novelty of that competition kind of wears off pretty quickly. So yeah, there's no huge details yet, but it seems to be, the article says it, not a false dawn after a bunch of false dawns, essentially, where there's been talk of it almost being across the cards and it's never come to be. They seem pretty confident that a Fijian team and a Moana Pasifika side will be able to be signed up for 2022. So it's one we'll monitor with interest. The fact that New Zealand Rugby is willing to share the broadcast revenue is certainly a step in the right direction. 12-team competition. They reckon in the next few months, hopefully by April, we should know more what is going to happen. So, yeah, hopefully for mine, it's a real chance for Pacific players. Like I mentioned, the Drua has been a hell of a success story. I hope Moana Pasifika doesn't end up being a team full of just New Zealand born and raised players. Personally, I don't think that adds a heck of a lot of value. I think we need more guys either coming back from Europe, professional players, or guys from Samoa and from Tonga playing rugby as their career. I think that's the only way that this actually adds value overall. But obviously as a spectacle, it will certainly be awesome to see a team like that playing. But yeah, no South Africa, no Argentina in this one. Australia, New Zealand, and the 2 Pacific teams. That's what's on the table. What do you guys reckon? Do you think this will be able to be a financially viable one going forward? Obviously, the travel would be way reduced compared to what we used to see with Super Rugby, the old Super Rugby, even though this is still called Super Rugby, helpfully. But yeah, because it's kind of all in the same neck of the woods, the time zones wouldn't be so bad, but it would still have to be competitive, and if it's not, then we may see the same issues we had with the competitions in the past. But anyway, what do you guys reckon? Would you be happy to see a 12-team Super Rugby competition that looks like this? Or do you think we're better off sticking to Super Rugby Aotearoa and AU and then maybe having some kind of like Champions Cup knockout competition where it's like the winners of each competition play each other or something like this? Do you think this is a genuine chance for guys from the Pacific to play professional rugby? Maybe not have to apply their trade in Europe. Anyway, you guys let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.